At my sister's wedding, my father laughed as he introduced me to the groom's family. Hannah has one of those little office jobs. She organizes paperwork nobody wants to read. My mother smiled. My sister leaned close and whispered, "Please don't embarrass me tonight." I was still deciding whether to walk away when a man crossed the ballroom straight toward me. Owen Cross, 34, billionaire founder of one of the fastest-growing biotech companies in the country. He stopped in front of me. "I've been looking for you." Then he took my hand. "And I was hoping you came alone." My sister's smile vanished, but that wasn't the moment that changed my life. 10 minutes later, my aunt pulled me aside and asked one question that made the entire wedding disappear around me. "Hannah, who told you your grandmother stopped writing to you?" 2 hours earlier, I had been kneeling on the carpet outside the bridal suite, with a safety pin between my teeth. Brooke's dress had caught on the edge of a decorative table, and somehow that had become my emergency. It usually did. "Hold still," I told her. "I am holding still. You're moving every time you complain." She huffed and looked down at me through the mirror. At 31, my younger sister had spent most of her life surrounded by people who arrived before consequences did. If she forgot something, Mom remembered it. If Mom forgot something, Dad paid for it. And if both of them somehow missed it, somebody called me, usually with the same sentence: "Hannah will know what to do." I was 37 years old, a corporate records and information governance manager, and I had spent the morning before my sister's wedding doing exactly what my family thought I did for a living: fixing things no one else wanted to think about. My phone buzzed on the carpet beside my knee. A message from Mom. "Did you make sure the photographer has the revised family shot list?" I had. Another message arrived before I could answer. "And Brooke's grandmother bracelet? She said you had it." I did. I had also confirmed the shuttle schedule, corrected a typo on the seating chart, found the florist's missing invoice, and called the hotel because Brooke had accidentally booked one fewer room than she needed. None of those jobs belonged to me. I had done them anyway. Brooke turned slightly. The tiny tear near the hem disappeared beneath a fold of white fabric. "There," I said. She looked at herself in the mirror, instead of at me. "Thanks." I waited. A ridiculous part of me still waited for something more. "You saved me. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You've done too much already. Go enjoy yourself." Instead, she adjusted one diamond earring. "Can you make sure Mom doesn't change the order of the speeches again?" I stood. For 1 second, I looked at myself beside her in the mirror. Brooke in white silk, glowing beneath the soft vanity lights. Me in a dark green dress I had bought because Mom said navy would make me look too corporate. I almost laughed. Apparently I was corporate only when it made me look bad. "Ask the wedding coordinator," I said. Brooke finally turned. "What?" "That's what she's here for." Her eyebrows lifted. It was such a small refusal that another person might not have noticed it. Brooke did. My family always noticed when I stopped doing something they had already decided was mine. "You're being weird today." "I'm getting a drink." "Hannah." I picked up my clutch. "What?" She lowered her voice. "Please don't start anything tonight." I stared at her. "I repaired your dress. You know what I mean." Actually, I did. In our family, starting something rarely meant shouting. It meant noticing. Asking why. Correcting a story. Saying no after everyone had already counted on yes. I opened my mouth to give her the answer I had given for most of my life. "Of course. Don't worry. I'm sorry." Instead I said, "I'm going downstairs." The ballroom looked exactly the way Brooke had imagined it. White roses. Crystal chandeliers. Gold-edged menus. A string quartet near the windows. Everything soft, expensive, and carefully placed. My mother stood near the center of the room as if the whole thing had been built around her. Janet Pierce could make any space feel like her living room. She knew who had arrived, who was late, who had remarried, who had gained weight, who was fighting with whom, and which parts of all of that were acceptable to mention publicly. When she saw me, she waved me over. "Hannah, come meet Daniel's aunt and uncle." Daniel was Brooke's new husband. I walked over with my drink. Dad stood beside Mom, one hand in his pocket. Richard Pierce had perfected a particular smile over the years, the one that made a cruel remark sound like an affectionate joke. "This is our oldest," Mom said. Daniel's aunt smiled at me. What do you do, Hannah? I had answered that question hundreds of times. I work in information governance. I oversee records, lifecycle, retention, regulatory documentation, things like that. Before the woman could respond, Dad laughed. Hannah has one of those little office jobs where she organizes paperwork nobody wants to read. The aunt gave the polite chuckle people use when they are unsure whether a joke is funny. Dad continued. She's always been good at filing things. Mom touched my arm. Brooke got all the people skills. There it was, the family shorthand. Brooke was warm. Brooke was charming. Brooke understood people. I understood paper. For years, I had helped them tell that story. Usually, by laughing. Usually by saying something like, "He's not wrong." That night I lifted my glass and took a sip instead. Dad's smile held a fraction too long. Mom's fingers tightened around my arm. Daniel's aunt looked at me. So what does information governance actually involve? I answered her. Not defensively. Not to prove anything. Just accurately. Making sure organizations know what records they have, which version is authoritative, who has access to them, what they're legally required to retain, and when conflicting records need to be investigated. She nodded. That sounds important. Before I could answer, Mom said, well, important to somebody, apparently. The laugh around us was smaller this time. I felt the old heat rise along my neck. That sensation had followed me through half my childhood. The moment before I made myself smaller so everyone else could stay comfortable. Then Brooke appeared beside me. She was still smiling for the room, but her hand caught my elbow. Can I borrow my sister? She steered me 3 steps away. What are you doing? I blinked. Having a conversation. You're being stiff with Mom. I answered a question about my job. Her smile remained fixed. Please don't embarrass me tonight. There were dozens of things I could have said. I repaired your dress upstairs. I spent 3 Saturdays helping you compare venues. I corrected your guest list after you sent invitations to 2 at the wrong addresses. I used vacation days for this wedding. Instead, I heard myself preparing the old response. Sorry. The word reached the back of my teeth. I stopped it there. I haven't done anything. Brooke's expression changed. Not anger exactly. Confusion. As if I had missed a line in a script we had been performing for years. Before she could answer, several people near the entrance turned toward the ballroom doors. I followed their gaze. Owen Cross had just walked in. Even if you didn't follow business news, you knew his name. 34. Founder of Cross Helix, a biotech data company that had gone public 2 years earlier. Magazine covers, conference interviews, photos beside people whose names moved stock prices. I knew him for a less glamorous reason. 18 months earlier, my firm had been brought into Cross Helix during a records remediation project after an acquisition. 3 divisions had inherited overlapping systems, conflicting retention rules, and several versions of documents that were all being treated as final. I had spent 11 weeks asking people questions they did not enjoy answering. Owen had sat in on 2 of those meetings, maybe 3, that was it. So when he walked directly toward me, I assumed for several seconds that someone important must be standing behind me. Dad straightened. Mom smiled immediately. Brooke turned fully toward him. Owen stopped in front of me. Hannah Pierce. I looked up at him. Hi. I've been looking for you. Behind him, Dad's face changed. Just slightly. Me. Owen laughed. Yes, you. He offered his hand. I took it. I saw your name on the seating display but couldn't figure out which table they'd hidden you at. I wasn't aware I was hidden. Then the room is badly organized. I smiled despite myself. Owen glanced toward my parents. Your daughter saved us months of cleanup. Dad chuckled. She does love her paperwork. Owen looked at him, not rudely, just with the kind of pause that made people hear what they had actually said. She was the person who caught 3 versions of the same record telling 3 different stories while everyone else was arguing over which department owned the problem. His attention returned to me. You were right, by the way. We rebuilt the whole retention workflow. Something shifted inside my chest. It shouldn't have mattered. I knew what I did for a living. My salary knew. My team knew. My clients knew. But hearing someone describe my competence plainly in front of the people who had reduced it to a joke felt strangely disorienting. Owen lowered his voice. I was also hoping you came alone. I stared at him, then laughed. That sounded rehearsed. It was better in my head. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Brooke. Her smile had disappeared. Owen asked whether he could get me a drink later. I said maybe. Not yes because he was Owen Cross. Not no because my family was watching. Maybe. My choice. He squeezed my hand once before letting go. I'll find you. When he walked away, Mom was beside me almost immediately. Well, she said. I looked at her. What? Don't read too much into that. I almost smiled. I wasn't. Dad laughed. He probably remembers you because you gave him trouble over some form. Brooke folded her arms. Can tonight please stay about me? I stared at all three of them. I haven't made it about anyone. Mom glanced toward my Aunt Elaine, who had walked up during the last part of the exchange. Janet gave a small laugh. Owen was just being polite. Hannah did some administrative support for his company once. Elaine looked at her. Then, at me. I saw something strange in her expression. Not surprise. Recognition. She had heard Owen. She had heard exactly what he said. And 2 minutes later she had watched my mother replace it with something else. Elaine waited until Mom and Dad moved away. Then she asked quietly, Does she still do that? My fingers tightened around my glass. Do what? Elaine looked toward Mom. Tell a different version before the real one has even finished happening. I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed. Because something in the question made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't explain. Elaine glanced around the room. Come with me. She led me into the hallway beyond the ballroom doors. The music softened behind us. What is this about? She hesitated. That frightened me more than if she had answered immediately. It's about your grandmother. My stomach tightened. Grandma June had been dead for 3 years. What about her? She would have loved hearing Owen talk about your work. I looked toward the ballroom. Grandma stopped caring what happened to me a long time before she died. Elaine's face went still. What are you talking about? She stopped speaking to me. When? I stared at her. You know when? No, Hannah, I don't. After the fight with Mom. When Grandma kept telling me I should leave Boston, and Mom said she was trying to turn me against the family. Elaine blinked. And then? Then she stopped calling. Stopped writing. Mom said she wanted space. Elaine said nothing. The hallway suddenly felt too cold. What? She stepped closer. Hannah. Who told you your grandmother stopped writing to you? I could hear my own pulse. Mom. Elaine closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, she looked older. June wrote to you. For years. I actually laughed. It came out wrong. Sharp. No, she didn't. Yes. I would know. Would you? The question hurt. I took a step back. What does that mean? Elaine pressed her lips together. I found something. What? A box. I waited. A few weeks ago I finally started going through the last things I had from June. She left boxes with me when she moved out of her apartment. I kept putting them off, because most of it was papers and old correspondence. My skin prickled. What was in it? Copies. Copies of what? Letters. The music from the ballroom swelled as somebody opened the door behind us, then faded again. Elaine lowered her voice. Letters addressed to you. I thought of cream envelopes. Blue ink. June's handwriting. Large and slanted, because arthritis had made the smaller letters difficult. For a second I was 27 again. Standing in my mother's kitchen. June had called earlier that week. Mom had answered. Later, she told me. Your grandmother doesn't want you calling for a while. She thinks you've been disrespectful. I remembered staring at my phone that night. I had called once. No answer. A week later, Mom told me to stop pushing. She wants space, Hannah. So I had given her space. Months later, when I changed phone numbers after switching carriers, not June. Because by then I believed giving her my number would be violating something she had specifically asked for. Later, I tried finding her Facebook profile. It didn't appear. Mom shrugged. She probably blocked you. Let it go. And I had. Or tried to. I had spent years telling myself I was respecting a boundary. Now Elaine was watching me like someone who knew the wall had been built somewhere else. Why do you have them? I asked. I don't know everything yet. That isn't what I asked. I know. Why didn't you tell me? I only found the box 3 weeks ago. My jaw tightened. And in those 3 weeks? She looked back toward the ballroom. I told myself Brooke's wedding wasn't the place to reopen this. And now it is? Her eyes moved toward the doors. I heard Owen describe what you actually did for his company. I said nothing. Then I heard your mother tell me, standing 5 feet away, that you did administrative support. Elaine swallowed. I watched her replace something I had just heard with my own ears. Something inside me went quiet. She continued. And I realized I had seen her do that before. With Grandma? I think you should see the box before I say anything else. Do you think Mom kept my mail? I don't know exactly what happened to every letter. The answer irritated me. It also made me trust her a little more. She wasn't giving me a perfect villain confession. She was admitting where her knowledge stopped. When can I see it? Tomorrow. No. Elaine blinked. Monday. Give me Sunday to get through Brooke's brunch and get home. I surprised myself. Old Hannah would have abandoned everything immediately. Would have stayed awake all night. Would have let the mystery consume whatever came next. I wanted answers. But I also wanted to decide when I went looking for them. Monday, I repeated. Elaine nodded. Monday. When I returned to the ballroom, Mom was waiting beside our table with a cream folder. For a wild second, I thought of June. Then Janet opened it. Wedding receipts. Of course. Before you leave, she said. Can you take these? Brooke won't want to deal with them after the honeymoon. She handed me a typed list. Gift inventory. Vendor balances. Thank you addresses. A discrepancy in the florist deposit. My hands knew exactly what to do. Take the folder. Put it in my bag. Fix everything by Tuesday. Mom was already turning away because, in her mind, the handoff had happened. Mom. She looked back. I held the folder out. You should give this to Brooke. Her forehead tightened. She'll be exhausted. Then she can decide when she wants to do it. You're better at this. There it was. The compliment that had cost me half my life. You're better at this. You're stronger. You're organized. You don't mind. You can handle it. I looked at the folder, then at my mother. I know I am. For a moment she almost smiled, assuming I had agreed. I placed it back in her hands. That doesn't make it mine. Her face changed. Hannah, I'm going home. Because of what happened with Owen? No. Then why are you acting like this? I almost explained. Elaine. June. The box. The letters. I could already hear Mom answering before I had evidence. Elaine misunderstood. June was confused. You're dredging things up. You're being dramatic. For once, I didn't give her the chance to define the question before I had even asked it. I'm tired, I said. Then I left. At home, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of my bed without turning on the lights. My phone had 17 notifications. 3 from Mom. 2 from Brooke. 1 from Owen. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop. An email I had ignored for 13 days was still sitting near the top of my inbox. Director of Information Governance, Washington, D.C. A recruiter had reached out twice. The first time, I had told myself the timing was bad. Brooke's wedding. Dad had insurance paperwork coming up. Mom hated driving into the city alone. The second time, I hadn't answered at all. I had never even asked myself whether I wanted the job. I had asked whether leaving would inconvenience everyone else. The old Hannah knew that calculation by heart. I clicked reply. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed. Hi Melissa. Thank you for following up. Yes, I'd like to hear more about the role. Please send me some times that work next week. I read it twice, then hit send. The room did not collapse. My phone did not ring with an emergency. No one appeared at my door demanding an explanation. It was just an email. One decision. Mine. A minute later, my phone buzzed. Aunt Elaine. I opened it. I went through the box again. June kept copies of the letters. There are returned envelopes too. Some were never opened. Please don't ask Janet about this yet. I read the message once. Then again. Then a third time. For 10 years, I had believed my grandmother had chosen silence. That she had decided I was difficult, ungrateful, not worth reaching for. But sitting alone in my apartment, with my sister's wedding makeup still on my face, I understood one thing with terrible clarity. Whatever had happened between my grandmother and me, silence hadn't been her first choice. Monday afternoon, I stood outside Aunt Elaine's condo with my hand on the bell and wondered how many times in my life I had confused restraint with obedience. The box was somewhere on the other side of that door. For 2 days, I had managed not to call my mother. That should not have felt like an accomplishment. It did. Janet had called 6 times since the wedding. The first voicemail asked why I had left early. The second reminded me that Brooke still needed help organizing thank you notes. By Sunday night, the tone had changed. Hannah, I don't know what Elaine said to you, but you know she has always had issues with me. Please don't let somebody else create problems where there aren't any. I had listened twice, not because the message convinced me, because of the wording. She did not ask what Elaine had said. She told me how to interpret it. That distinction had been bothering me all morning. Elaine opened the door before I rang. You came. You said Monday. I wasn't sure you still would. I stepped inside. Her condo smelled faintly of coffee and cardboard. Half the dining room was occupied by moving boxes, some sealed, some split open with their contents stacked into uneven piles. You're moving? I asked. Downsizing. I should have done it last year. She led me toward the table. Then, I saw the box. It was gray. The kind sold for old tax records, with a lid that had softened at the corners. Someone had written June in black marker across one side. I stopped 3 feet away. Elaine watched me. I can make coffee. No. Hannah, please don't make this easier for me. Her expression tightened. I wasn't trying to. I know. That was the problem. Almost everyone in my family had spent years trying to make things easier by deciding what I should not have to know. I pulled out a chair. Show me. Elaine sat across from me and removed the lid. The first thing I saw was handwriting, blue ink on cream paper. My grandmother had written slowly in her later years, pressing hard enough that I could sometimes feel the shape of words from the other side of a page. I knew that handwriting before I could read a single sentence. My fingers stayed on the edge of the table. How many? I haven't counted all of them. Then what have you counted? Elaine looked at me carefully. 26 copies. 4 returned envelopes. Her mailing notebook. Some printed emails. A few pages of notes. Copies. That word brought me back into myself. What kind of copies? Photocopies. Made when? I don't know yet. Did she date them? The letters are dated. That isn't what I asked. Elaine blinked. I heard how sharp I sounded, and almost apologized. Almost. Instead, I lowered my voice. I need to know what I'm looking at before I decide what it means. She nodded. That sounds like you. For once, I did not hear it as criticism. I put my purse on the floor and pulled a notebook from it. Elaine gave a small, tired laugh. You brought supplies. I manage records for a living. I know. Apparently, that puts you ahead of Dad. The joke landed badly between us. Neither of us smiled. I started with the returned envelopes. They were real originals, not copies. Each one had June's handwriting on the front and postal markings across the corner. 2 were still sealed. 1 had been stamped with an old forwarding notice. Another had been returned because the forwarding period had expired. I checked the addresses. The first 2 were apartments I had actually lived in. The last 2 were old by the time June mailed them. She didn't have my current address, I said. Elaine shook her head. She told me once that Janet said you preferred not to give it to her. My pen stopped. When? I don't remember exactly. Try. After June moved out of her apartment. Before the hospital scare. That's still years. I know. Did you ask me? No. The answer came quietly. I looked at her. Why? Elaine pressed her palms against the table. Because by then your mother had convinced everybody that you and June were in some kind of Cold War. Everybody? Me. Your father. Brooke. Some cousins. I don't know who else. And you believed her. I believed enough of it not to interfere. That isn't the same thing. No. For the first time since I arrived, she did not try to soften her answer. I turned to the photocopies. The first letter I picked up was dated a little less than 10 years earlier. Dear Hannah, your mother says you need more space from me. I don't understand what I said that made you feel cornered, but I won't force myself where I'm not wanted. I stopped reading. The room seemed to shrink around the page. I looked at Elaine. I never told her that. I know. No, you don't. Elaine flinched. I tapped the letter. You know what she wrote. You don't know what I said. You're right. I looked back down. That was the first thing that separated this room from every argument I had ever had with my mother. Nobody was asking me to accept a conclusion before we established the facts. I wrote the date in my notebook. Then I added a column. What June believed. Another. What I was told. Another. Verified. Another. Unknown. Elaine watched me draw the lines. What are you doing? Trying not to become mom. She stared at me. I turned to the next letter. A few months later. Janet says you changed your number and don't want me to have the new one. I wish you had told me yourself, but I will respect it. My throat closed. I had changed my number. I remembered exactly when. The old carrier had been terrible in my apartment, and I had switched plans after weeks of dropped calls. I had sent the new number to Mom, Dad, Brooke, co-workers, 2 friends, and a neighbor who watched my cat when I traveled. Not June. Because at that point I believed June did not want contact with me. I looked at Elaine. Mom told her I didn't want her to have my number. That's what the letter says. And Mom told me Grandma didn't want me calling. Elaine did not answer. She didn't have to. I wrote both statements down. Same period. Opposite versions. One person in the middle. My phone vibrated in my purse. I ignored it. Then it vibrated again. Elaine glanced toward the sound. You can answer. No. What if it's work? Work emails me. A third vibration. I pulled the phone out. Mom. I declined the call and turned the phone face down. Elaine said nothing. That silence felt different from the ones I had grown up with. It did not pressure me. It left room for me to make a decision. I picked up another page. The line halfway down made my stomach drop. I tried the email address Janet gave me, but it came back unanswered. She says you don't use that account anymore. I did use that account then. Not often, but enough. I still had it archived. Was Grandma still using email by herself? Elaine made a face. Barely. Define barely. She could read messages if she got in. Writing replies was harder. Passwords were a nightmare. Your mother handled most of that. I looked up. Handled how? She helped her log in. Fixed things when she got locked out. Cleaned out junk mail. Set up the phone whenever June accidentally changed something. Facebook? Same. That was not news. I had seen Janet do it. Years earlier, June had called my mother from the kitchen because she had somehow changed the font size on her tablet and could not get it back. Mom had laughed about it for weeks. At the time, it had looked like caregiving. Maybe some of it was. Access did not prove misuse. I wrote that down too. Janet had access. Not. Janet altered accounts. Not. Janet deleted emails. Access. Nothing more. That mattered. I was staring at the word when an old memory surfaced. Late one night, years after June and I stopped speaking, I had searched her name on Facebook. Nothing. I tried again with her maiden name. Nothing. I remember sitting on the floor beside my couch because my laptop charger barely reached the outlet. I had texted my friend Natalie afterward. I think my grandmother blocked me. Mom says I should stop pushing. The message might still exist. Do you have Wi-Fi? I asked. Elaine blinked. Yes. I opened my laptop. My hands felt steadier when I had something concrete to do. I searched my old message archive. It took 11 minutes. Then there it was. A conversation with Natalie. I read the timestamp twice. The message was mine. I think Grandma blocked me on Facebook too. I guess Mom was right. She really doesn't want me around. I stared at those words. I remembered writing them. I remembered how embarrassed I had felt. Not angry. Embarrassed that I was still trying to reach someone who apparently did not want me. Elaine leaned closer. What is it? I turned the screen. She read silently. Then reached into the box. There's something else. She handed me one of June's notes. Not a letter, just a lined sheet in her handwriting. Ask Janet again about Facebook. She says Hannah blocked me. I don't know how to undo that and don't want to make things worse. I stopped breathing for a second. On one side of Boston, I had believed my grandmother blocked me. Somewhere else, June had been told I blocked her. Neither of us had spoken to the other directly. I looked down at the two records side by side. My message. Her nota. Same relationship. Same silence. Opposite story. Janet standing between both. That did not prove who clicked what. It did prove something else. Someone had been translating our silence for us, and Janet's translations had never matched. I closed my laptop halfway. Why didn't you tell me any of this before the wedding? Elaine looked toward the box. I told you. I found it 3 weeks ago. You found the box 3 weeks ago. You knew Grandma and Mom fought about me years ago. Yes. You knew Grandma thought I was pulling away. Yes. And you never called me. Her shoulders dropped. No. Why? For a few seconds she looked like she wanted to give me an answer that would make us both feel better. Instead she said, cowardice. That surprised me. Elaine rubbed her thumb over a coffee stain on the table. June complained about Janet interfering, but she also changed her mind a lot. One day she'd say your mother was keeping you away. The next day she'd say maybe you really didn't want her. Then Janet would tell me you were furious with June, and I'd think it wasn't my place. It was easier not to ask. Yes. And after June died? I convinced myself, asking you then, would only hurt you. I looked at her. That was another decision about what I could handle. I know. The words landed without defense. I hated that they made it harder to stay angry with her. Not impossible. Just harder. Why now? Elaine glanced toward the hallway as though she could still see the ballroom from 2 nights earlier. Because I heard that man describe what you did for his company. Owen. Yes. I heard him say exactly what you had done. Then Janet turned around and told me you had done administrative support. Her mouth tightened. It happened right in front of me, Hannah. I didn't have to rely on anybody's memory. I didn't have to wonder who misunderstood whom. I heard the first version and then I watched your mother replace it with one that made you smaller. She pushed the box an inch toward me, and all I could think was that I had watched her do that for years and kept telling myself maybe I hadn't heard clearly. Something in my chest shifted. Not forgiveness. Recognition. Elaine had been gaslighting herself too. That did not erase her silence. But it explained why the silence had lasted. I spent the next 2 hours reading only enough to build the first sequence. I did not devour every letter. That surprised me. Part of me wanted to. Another part knew that if I read them as a granddaughter before I understood how they had been preserved, I would lose the distinction between emotion and evidence. There would be time to grieve later. For now, I needed dates. I needed sources. I needed to know what could be supported. The mailing notebook helped. June had written down dates, destinations, and occasional notes. Returned. No reply. Sent care of Janet. Tried email. Asked Elaine. The entries were uneven, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes months. But they existed. By the time I closed the notebook, the old story could no longer stand. June had not simply stopped. I still did not know what happened to every missing letter. I did not know whether Janet deleted anything online. I did not know whether June herself had sometimes chosen not to contact me. What I knew was narrower and stronger. My grandmother kept trying after I had been told she wanted distance. Someone had repeatedly told each of us that the other had chosen silence. And the same person appeared in both versions. On the drive home, Mom called again. This time I answered. Hannah, finally. What do you need? The question stopped her. What do you mean? You've called 8 times since Saturday. What do you need? I'm your mother. I shouldn't need a reason to call. Then what did you want to talk about? A pause. I heard you went to Elaine's. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. How? Does it matter? Yes. Another pause. Then she sighed. Elaine called your father about something unrelated and mentioned you were coming by. Maybe true. Maybe not. I was done filling blanks for people. Okay. What did she show you? There it was. Not. How is Elaine? Not. Did you have a good visit? What did she show you? I slowed at a red light. What do you think she showed me? Mom's voice hardened. I'm not playing games. Neither am I. Hannah, whatever old papers she found, your grandmother was confused in those last years. I looked through the windshield. June's earliest letters in the box predated the period anyone had ever described as confusion. I did not correct Mom. Not yet. She could be very emotional, Janet continued. And Elaine loves having something to hold over me. Then you have nothing to worry about. Silence. Hannah. I have to go. Your father still needs help with that insurance renewal. There it was again. The pivot. From history to obligation. From question to task. Dad can call the number on the form. He hates those phone systems. I know. You're much better at this. The same compliment. Different folder. I know that too. I ended the call before she could turn competence into consent. At home, I put the notebook on my kitchen counter and opened my old email account. Searching it felt almost archaeological. Old newsletters. Hotel confirmations. Work receipts. Birthday reminders. Then I found something from Janet. The subject line was harmless. Family stuff. The message had gone to several relatives. Please don't carry messages between Mom and Hannah right now. They both need space, and every time somebody gets involved it makes things worse. I checked the date. 4 days after, one of June's letters said, "Your mother says you need more space from me." I sat very still. I had never asked Janet to send that email. I had never asked the family not to contact me. I had never even known she told them that. For the first time, I began to understand how a person could be isolated without anyone locking a door. Tell one side she wants space. Tell the other side they should respect it. Make every attempt at contact look like aggression. Then call the resulting silence proof. My phone chimed. Not Mom. Owen. Coffee tomorrow? No ballroom. No relatives. Significantly lower risk of being introduced as administrative support. I laughed before I could stop myself. Then I hesitated. 2 days earlier, I might have declined, because there was too much happening, because Dad had paperwork, because Mom was upset, because June's box existed, because serious things always seemed to outrank anything I wanted. I typed back. Tomorrow works. 1 hour. I have a call afterward. The call was with the recruiter in Washington. I had not told anyone in my family. That felt less like secrecy than ownership. Coffee with Owen, the next afternoon, was easier than I expected. He did not ask why I had left the wedding early. He did not pry about my parents. He told me Cross Helix was still using the retention structure my team had recommended, and I asked whether they had finally stopped letting department heads name every draft final. Mostly. That means no. That means executives are creative people. I smiled. For nearly 40 minutes, I was simply a woman talking about work with someone who understood what the work was. Then he asked, "You said you have a call after this?" "A job conversation." "Here?" "Washington." His eyebrows rose. "Moving?" "Maybe." I expected some version of the response I had heard from my mother whenever I mentioned leaving Boston. "That's far." "What about holidays? What if your father needs something?" Instead, Owen stirred his coffee. "Do you want it?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know yet." Good reason to take the call. "That's it? What else would there be?" I looked down at my cup. Apparently, in some parts of the world, a possible job was allowed to be a question about the person taking it, not everybody else affected by her absence. Owen leaned back. "You know, the thing I remember most about that project wasn't the mess." "What was it?" "You were the only person in the room who didn't assume 2 records matched, just because everybody kept saying they did." I almost laughed. He had no idea what he had just touched. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately." He didn't ask why. I appreciated him for that. When we left, he touched my hand lightly and said he would like to see me again. I said I would like that too. Then I walked 3 blocks to a quiet lobby, sat near a window, and took the recruiter call. The role was bigger than I had expected. A director position. A team of 12. More responsibility. A meaningful salary increase. The recruiter asked if relocation would be a problem. I looked out at people moving along the sidewalk. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm willing to find out." That evening, I opened a rental website and looked at apartments in Washington. Not because I had the job. Not because I was running away. Because for the first time in years, I wanted to know what my life might look like somewhere else. I filtered for natural light. A reasonable commute. A kitchen big enough to cook in. I caught myself almost checking travel time back to my parents' house. I closed that tab. Then I opened my messages and typed to Brooke. Do you remember Grandma June mailing me anything after the fight with Mom? Her reply came quickly. No, I don't think so. I set the phone down. An hour passed. Then another. I was brushing my teeth when the screen lit up on the bathroom counter. Brooke. Wait. I picked up the phone. There was one envelope. Another message appeared. Cream-colored. Your name was on it. My pulse quickened. Then the third. I gave it to Mom. I stood completely still, toothbrush in one hand, phone in the other. For the first time, the missing letters had passed through the hands of someone still alive. Brooke called before I could decide whether I wanted her to. Her name flashed across my screen while I was still standing in the bathroom, toothpaste drying at the corner of my mouth, her last message glowing beneath it. I gave it to Mom. I let the phone ring twice. Then I answered. Tell me exactly what you remember. There was a pause. Not hello. Not why are you asking. I had learned something from Aunt Elaine's box. The fastest way to lose a fact was to bury it under everybody's feelings about the fact. Brooke spoke carefully. It came to Mom and Dad's house. When? I don't know. Approximate. Hannah, it was years ago. I know. Were you in college? Another pause. I think I had just moved back after graduation. That narrowed it. You would have been 21. Probably. What did the envelope look like? Cream-colored, thick paper, I think. Was it already open? No. Are you sure? Yes. How do you know? Because I remember your name on the front. I wiped my mouth with a towel and walked into the bedroom. Where was Mom? In the kitchen. And what happened? Brooke exhaled. I brought it in with the rest of the mail. She saw it. And? She asked where it came from. Couldn't she see? Yes. Then why ask? I don't know, Hannah. Her irritation surfaced for the first time. I ignored it. What did she say? Silence stretched between us. Then Brooke said. She said Grandma was trying to stir you up again. Something cold moved through me. Those words? I think so. Think, or remember. Hannah. Brooke. Another breath. Yes, something like that. She said Grandma kept filling your head with ideas about leaving, and that you were already upset enough. I sat on the edge of my bed. What did you do? I gave it to Mom. Did she ask you to? Yes. What exactly did she say? She said, give it to me. Hannah doesn't need this right now. The sentence was so ordinary. I could hear Janet saying it, not angry, not secretive, practical. As though my mail were one more item on a list she was qualified to manage. I closed my eyes. Did you ever ask me whether I got it? Brooke didn't answer. I opened my eyes again. Brooke. No. That one word mattered more than an apology would have. Why not? I don't know. You didn't wonder? I probably forgot. You forgot a letter addressed to me because Mom took it. Hannah, I was 21. The old reflex rose instantly. You were young. It wasn't your fault. Mom put you in the middle. I could almost hear myself saying it. Instead, I stood and walked toward the kitchen. You were 21, not 12. She went quiet. I'm not saying you planned anything, I said. I'm asking whether you ever checked with me. No. Then don't turn your age into an answer. That's not fair. I stopped beside the counter. There it was. The phrase that had carried us through most of our lives. Not fair. Brooke got something wrong, and the first question became whether acknowledging it would make her feel bad. I softened my voice without changing the sentence. You didn't create this, but you benefited from never asking. She inhaled sharply. That's a horrible thing to say. Is it inaccurate? You've always helped me because you wanted to. That landed harder than I expected. Not because it was entirely false, because it was partly true. I had wanted to help her. That was what made the system so difficult to see. Nobody had put a contract in front of me when I was 17 and asked me to become the second adult in the house. They had simply needed something, then something else, then one more thing. And every time I handled it well, the reward was more responsibility. I wanted to help you, I said. That doesn't mean I understood how permanent the job was going to become. What job? I almost laughed. Instead, I looked at the notebook still open on the counter. The one where everybody decides I can handle something, so nobody asks whether I should have to. Brooke didn't respond. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the refrigerator humming. Then she said, much quieter, I really didn't know about the other letters. I believe you. That surprised her. How can you? Because I'm not trying to make you guilty for things I can't prove. That was when I understood the difference between what I wanted and what I needed. I did not need Brooke to become innocent. I needed her to become accurate. Will you write down what you remember? I asked. What? Just what you told me. Approximate year. Where you found the envelope. What Mom said. What you did. Don't add anything you're guessing. You want me to make a statement? I want your memory before this gets retold 10 more times. She hesitated, then said, okay. It was the first thing she had done that changed the record instead of simply reacting to it. After we hung up, I stayed in the kitchen and stared at the closed cabinet above the sink. A memory came back with such ordinary detail that it almost annoyed me. Brooke at 17. Standing beside my car with a college application folded in half because she had forgotten to print the last page. Mom calling me at work. Can you fix it? I had. Brooke at 19. Calling from a bus station after missing the last train home. Dad had an early meeting. Mom hated driving at night. Can you get her? I had. Brooke's first apartment. Her resume. Her security deposit spreadsheet. Her graduation dinner. The time she lost her health insurance card and called me before she called the insurer. None of those memories made her evil. That would have been easier. They showed something more embarrassing. How often I had participated. I had taught everyone that my time stretched. That my patience regenerated overnight. That competence came without cost. Mom called it being dependable. Dad called me the strong one. I had heard both as love. Now they sounded more like job descriptions. The next morning, I returned to Elaine's condo. She had left the box exactly where we had stopped. This time, I read farther. Not everything. Enough. One letter was dated from the year I was 27. June's handwriting was shakier than in the earlier pages. I still think the 6-month fellowship in Washington would be good for you. You light up when you talk about work that is yours. There is nothing wrong with being needed, Hannah. But be careful of people who only feel safe when you stay where they put you. I stopped. Washington. I read the paragraph again. Something moved at the edge of memory. A professional fellowship. Records management. Government and corporate information systems. I had seen an announcement somewhere. Or maybe June had mentioned it. The memory would not sharpen. I turned the page. The next sentence did. I tucked the brochure in with this letter. Even if you decide not to apply, I want the decision to be yours. My hand tightened around the paper. I had never seen a brochure. Never filled out an application. Never decided no. I had simply stayed. Elaine was in the kitchen making tea. Do you remember this? I called. She came back carrying 2 mugs. What? I turned the photocopy toward her and tapped the paragraph. She read it. The fellowship? Yes. I remember June talking about Washington. With me? With everybody who would listen. Did Mom know? Elaine looked at me. Hannah, Janet knew June wanted you to leave Boston. That's not what I asked. She set down the mugs. Yes, she knew. I stared at the sentence again. I want the decision to be yours. For 10 years, I had remembered that period differently. Brooke was struggling after college. Mom was overwhelmed. Dad traveled constantly for work. June kept saying I should go somewhere new. And Janet accused her of trying to break us apart. Dad had sat beside me at the kitchen table one night and said, "Your mother needs stability right now." I remembered being angry. Then, ashamed of being angry. I remembered deciding a 6-month opportunity was selfish. At least, I had always called it a decision. Now, I wasn't sure how much information had been removed before I made it. Elaine reached deeper into the box. There's an email that might matter. She handed me a printed page. The sender was Richard Pierce. The recipient was June. I knew Dad's old email address immediately. The message was short. Please stop encouraging Hannah to leave. Janet is beside herself. Hannah has responsibilities here. Brooke is still finding her feet, and I'm traveling too much to deal with all this. You're making things harder. I read it twice. Then a third time. Elaine watched me. I'm sorry. I folded the page back along its existing crease. Did Dad ever tell you he sent this? No. Did Grandma reply? There may be a copy. I haven't found one yet. I took a photo of the printed email and added its date to the timeline. My hands were steady. That frightened me more than shaking would have. For years, I had defended my father with the same sentence. Dad hates conflict. He was caught between Mom and Grandma. He just wanted everyone calm. The email did not look like a man trapped in the middle. It looked like a man asking someone else to stop offering me an exit because my absence would inconvenience him. I called him from my car. He answered on the fourth ring. Hannah, did you email Grandma June and ask her to stop encouraging me to leave Boston? Silence. Long enough that I heard the turn signal of a car passing behind me. Where's this coming from? Did you send the email? Your mother told me Elaine found some old things. That isn't an answer. He sighed. Yes, I probably did. Probably? It was 10 years ago. The email has your name on it. What do you want me to say? The truth would be efficient. His voice hardened. Don't speak to me like one of your employees. I looked through the windshield at Elaine's condo building. I asked one question. Yes, I sent it. The admission was so direct that for a second I had nothing prepared after it. Why? Because things were difficult. For whom? All of us. Be specific. Hannah. Your mother was under a lot of pressure. Brooke had just come home. I was traveling every other week. Your grandmother kept telling you that you should move away when what we needed was stability. The word we caught me. What did you need me to do? He went quiet. I waited. Then Dad said, you handled things. What things? You know. I want to hear you say it. He made an irritated sound. Appointments. Paperwork. Helping your sister. Making sure your mother didn't get overwhelmed. You were good at keeping everything organized. There it was. Not love. Not concern about whether Washington suited me. Function. The same skill he had mocked at Brooke's wedding had once been useful enough to interfere with an opportunity I might have taken. We needed you here, he said. I stared at my hands. That's different from wanting me here. Hannah, don't twist my words. I repeated them. You make it sound as though we forced you to stay. I'm trying to understand what choices I actually had when people were deciding what information reached me. Your mother made some mistakes. There it was again. Mom as weather. Mom as a force everyone else simply survived. And you? I asked. What about me? You sent the email. I was trying to keep the peace. A strange calm settled over me. No, you were trying to keep the system working. Hannah, if I had gone, you would have had to handle more of the appointments, forms, and emergencies yourself. That's ridiculous. Is it? You were part of a household. I was 27 and living in my own apartment. That doesn't stop you from having responsibilities. Responsibilities I agreed to? Or responsibilities you assigned because I was good at them? His breathing changed. I could tell he was angry. For once, I did not rush to reduce it. Then Dad said the thing that would have broken me a month earlier. Your mother is going to be devastated when she finds out you're talking about her this way. I looked at the email in my lap. That's something she'll have to manage. Hannah. You know how she gets. Yes. I waited. He apparently expected more. Some offer. A plan. A promise I would call Janet and calm her down. Instead I said, did you send the email? He sounded exhausted. Yes. Then that's the part I'm keeping. I ended the call. My heart was beating hard now. Not from fear. From resisting the urge to call him back and repair the conversation. That urge was almost physical. I wanted to explain that I still loved him. That I knew he had been stressed. That I understood travel was difficult. That I wasn't trying to make him the villain. All the sentences that would let him escape the discomfort before I had even processed my own. I put the phone in the passenger seat. Then I drove home without calling anyone. By late afternoon, the counterattack started. Mom left a voicemail. Hannah, your father says you accused him of conspiring against you. I don't know what Elaine is putting into your head, but this obsession with the past is unhealthy. I saved it. Not because it proved the letters. Because it showed how quickly the language shifted. I had asked Dad whether he sent an email. By the time the story reached Janet, I had accused him of conspiring. An hour later, a cousin texted, Your mom says there's some misunderstanding about Grandma June. Maybe let old things stay buried? Then an aunt I rarely heard from. Brooke just got married. This should be a happy time. Please don't create more stress for Janet. I read both messages. Neither person asked me what happened. They already had a version. That evening, Brooke called. Mom is furious. I assumed. She says Elaine is trying to split everyone up. What do you think? I don't know. That's allowed. Brooke sounded surprised. You're not going to tell me what to think. No. The old me would've. I would've explained Mom. Explained Elaine. Explained Dad. Reduced everybody's guilt to something easier to swallow. Brooke was 31. She could sit with uncertainty. So what are you going to do? She asked. Keep checking. Mom wants everyone at the house Saturday. I looked at my laptop. The recruiter had emailed 20 minutes earlier. They wanted a final interview. Saturday morning. For 1 second, the old calendar appeared in my mind. Mom needs me. Family meeting. Reschedule work. I opened the recruiter's message. What time Saturday? I asked. 10. The interview options included 9:30. Perfect. I'm busy. With what? A final interview. Silence. For Washington? Yes. You're serious? I'm interviewing. That's all I know. Does Mom know? No. Are you going to tell her? When there's something I choose to tell her. Brooke went quiet, then said, she's going to lose it. I clicked the 9:30 slot. That isn't a reason to give her the decision. After we hung up, I confirmed the interview. The appointment appeared on my calendar. For years, family emergencies had gone in first. My life fit into what remained. This time I placed my future on the calendar before Janet's meeting. If she wanted me at 10, she could wait. I returned to the letter from June. The one about Washington. The photocopy ended with her signature. No enclosure, of course. Only the sentence describing one. I added a new row to my timeline. Date. Letter. Verified photocopy. Reference to fellowship. Enclosure mentioned. Then I reached the last column. Status. I typed. Not received. I paused. Something else belonged there. I added. Contents of enclosure unknown beyond description, as fellowship brochure. No color. No design. Nothing else. Just a brochure I had never held. A decision I had never been allowed to see. I closed the file. For most of the week, I had been asking whether Janet lied to me about June. Now the question had changed. I wanted to know what my mother knew about that missing brochure. And more importantly, how she could possibly know it. Saturday morning, 40 minutes before I was supposed to sit across from my parents, I interviewed for a job in Washington. That order mattered to me. For most of my adult life, anything involving Janet had been treated as urgent by default. A bad mood became a crisis. A form became an emergency. A disagreement became something I needed to fix before I could return to whatever I had been doing for myself. This time, I put on a navy blouse, closed the bedroom door, and logged into the video call at 9:30. The woman interviewing me asked how I handled conflicting records when several senior people insisted their version was correct. A week earlier, I might have smiled at the irony. Instead, I answered honestly. I separate what people believe from what the record can support. Then I document what is verified, what is contradicted, and what remains unknown. She nodded. What if someone powerful pressures you to make the uncertainty disappear? You don't remove uncertainty by pretending it isn't there. I heard the sentence after I said it. For a second, my mother's voice seemed to move through the room. You know what happened. Everyone remembers it the same way. Why are you making this complicated? The interviewer asked another question. I kept going. When the call ended, I stayed seated for a moment, looking at my own reflection in the darkened screen. No one had interrupted. Dad's insurance had not collapsed because I had not called the company for him. Brooke had not fallen apart because I had refused to tell her what to think. The house had not burned down because Janet's meeting waited 40 minutes. I changed into flats, picked up the folder I had prepared the night before, and drove to my parents' house. The dining room table had hosted every version of our family I had ever been expected to believe. Birthday dinners where Brooke's mistakes became funny stories, and mine became warnings. Thanksgivings where Mom asked me to get up and serve something just as I sat down. Sunday afternoons when Dad slid paperwork toward me because I was better with details. That morning, I sat down without clearing anyone else's coffee cup first. Janet was already there. Dad sat beside her. Brooke had taken the chair across from me. Mom looked at the slim folder in front of me. "Where's Elaine?" "Not coming." Her mouth tightened. "Interesting. I didn't ask her to. So she fills your head with all this and then leaves you to attack us alone?" Brooke shifted in her chair. "Mom." "No, Brooke. I want to understand what exactly is happening here." I opened the folder. "That's what I want too." Janet gave a short laugh. "Listen to you." I waited. "You're talking like this is one of your work projects. In some ways, that's useful. I am your mother, Hannah, not a case file." "No. Which is why I've been careful not to accuse you of anything I can't support." That stopped her. Dad leaned forward. "Can we please keep this reasonable?" I looked at him. "I'm going to go through dates. If something is wrong, correct it." Mom folded her arms. "I don't accept the premise." "You don't have to." I placed the first page on the table. Grandma June continued writing to me, after I was told she wanted no contact. "That's not true," Janet said immediately. I slid copies of the returned envelopes toward her. Postal markings visible. Dates visible. Her eyes moved across them. Then she said, "I meant she stopped writing anything that needed to be passed along." Brooke looked at her. I wrote the sentence down. Mom's head snapped toward my pen. "What are you doing?" "Recording what you just said." "Oh, for God's sake." Dad rubbed his forehead. "Hannah, this is exactly what I was afraid of." "What?" Turning normal family confusion into evidence. I looked at the 4 returned envelopes. "Those are evidence that she mailed something. Not evidence of some conspiracy," he said. "I haven't used that word." He looked away. I moved to the next page. "Mom, you told me Grandma wanted me to stop calling. She was upset." "That isn't what I asked. I was trying to protect both of you." "Did she ask you to tell me not to call?" Janet's chin lifted. "You were both emotional." I glanced at the page. "Did she ask you?" "I don't remember every conversation from 10 years ago." "Okay." I wrote unknown next to the question. That seemed to bother her more than if I had accused her. "You see," Mom said. "You don't know." "You're right." She blinked. "I don't know whether Grandma directly asked you to stop my calls. That's why I'm not claiming she didn't." Dad stared at me. Mom's expression sharpened. The old argument depended on making me defend more than I could prove. I wasn't going to. I placed 2 pages side by side. One of Grandma's notes says you told her I had changed my number and didn't want her to have the new one. I might have misunderstood. My message to a friend from the same period says I believed Grandma had blocked me online. Janet shrugged. "That proves nothing. It proves what I believed at the time." And Grandma wrote that she had been told I blocked her." Brooke leaned over the pages. Mom said, "June was terrible with Facebook. She could have done anything to that account." I agree. That came too quickly for her. She looked at me. "I have not said you changed the settings." "Then, what exactly are you implying?" "Nothing. I'm documenting 2 statements." I touched one page. Grandma believed I had blocked her. Then the other. "I believed she had blocked me." Mom opened her mouth. I continued. "And according to both records, you were the person explaining the silence to each of us." "That is ridiculous." "Which part?" "That you're making me responsible for 2 grown women who refused to pick up a phone." The sentence hit hard enough that I almost lost my place. Because that was the shame I had carried for years. "Why didn't you try harder? Why didn't you call again? Why did you let 10 years go?" I could have defended myself. Instead, I pulled out another page. "I did call." Mom's expression changed. "I also sent an email, tried to find her online, and sent at least 1 card through you." "That doesn't mean she wanted to answer." "No, it doesn't." The room went quiet. "It means I did not simply disappear." Brooke looked down. Dad tapped 2 fingers against the table. Mom stared at the folder as though she hated that it contained limits as much as facts. I moved to Brooke's statement. "Brooke remembers receiving a cream envelope addressed to me at this house." Janet turned toward her. "You wrote something?" Brooke stiffened. "Hannah asked me to write what I remembered." "You didn't think to talk to me first?" Brooke's voice went thin. "It was her mail." Janet stared at her. The silence that followed was familiar. It was the silence Mom used when she expected somebody else to correct themselves. Brooke did not. I felt something small shift across the table. Not an alliance. Something more important. Direct responsibility. I read from Brooke's statement. She remembers you saying Grandma was trying to stir me up again and asking her to give you the envelope. Mom laughed. Brooke was 21. I know. She barely remembers what she ate last week. Brooke looked up. I remember the envelope. Janet's eyes hardened. You remember what Hannah has spent all week telling you to remember? No, Brooke said. I remember giving it to you. A pulse jumped in Mom's jaw. Then she looked at me. Fine. Maybe there was a letter. Maybe I took it because you were already upset. What happened to it? I don't know. Did you give it to me? I said I don't remember. I wrote that down. Janet pushed her chair back half an inch. This is unbelievable. I looked at her. No, that's the problem. Most of it is becoming fairly easy to believe. Dad stood. I need coffee. Sit down. The words came out before I thought about them. He stared at me. So did everyone else. For years, Dad had been allowed to leave any uncomfortable conversation under the cover of practicality. Coffee, a phone call, something in the garage. Then he would return after Mom had settled the emotional terrain. His face darkened. Excuse me, you asked for a family meeting. I'm here. There's one thing involving you directly. His eyes moved to the folder. I took out the printed email. Did you send this to Grandma? He didn't touch it. We already discussed that. We did. I want Brooke and Mom to hear your answer directly. Janet turned. What email? Dad looked at her. That told me something, though not enough to write down. I read the relevant sentence aloud. Please stop encouraging Hannah to leave. Janet is beside herself. Hannah has responsibilities here. Brooke is still finding her feet, and I'm traveling too much to deal with all this. Mom's expression froze. Brooke stared at Dad. He sat back down. Hannah, we needed help then. Brooke's face reddened. With me? Dad hid. It wasn't just you. But you named me. You were going through a difficult period. Brooke looked at me. I did not rescue her from what she had just heard. Dad continued. Your mother was overwhelmed. I was traveling constantly. Hannah was good at managing things. I held his gaze. You needed the work I did. We needed you. Those aren't always the same thing. Janet slapped her palm lightly against the table. Enough. You're taking ordinary things parents do and making them sound sinister. I turned to her. I haven't asked why yet. Her mouth closed. I reached for the last photocopy. The letter about Washington. The sentence June had written was clear. I still think the 6-month fellowship in Washington would be good for you. I read that much aloud. Janet immediately shook her head. Your grandmother was obsessed with getting you away from us. I continued. She says there was an enclosure. What enclosure? Dad asked. I kept my eyes on Mom. That's what I'm trying to establish. Janet leaned back. Well, obviously, it would have been something about the fellowship. Probably. There. So what? I waited. Mom frowned. I said, do you remember seeing it? No. Do you remember seeing the letter? No. Did you ever open mail Grandma addressed to me? Her eyes widened. Absolutely not. I nodded. Okay. I wrote the answer down. Mom's voice rose. That's it? For that question. You drag us here, accuse me of manipulating everybody, and now you say okay. I haven't accused you of opening that letter. Oh, please. That's what this whole performance is about. I looked at the page. Grandma wrote that she included something. Yes, that stupid fellowship. You said you never saw the letter. I didn't. Then we agree on your answer. Dad leaned toward me. Hannah, what are you trying to prove? I'm not trying to prove more than I know. Janet laughed again. That blue brochure wasn't even important. It was some little fellowship in D.C. You weren't going to uproot your whole life over that. The air changed. There was no dramatic sound. No glass breaking. No one gasped. The refrigerator in the kitchen clicked on. Somewhere upstairs, a pipe knocked. I looked at my mother. Then at the photocopy in front of me. The letter said brochure. It said Washington. It said fellowship. Nothing about color. Brooke's chair creaked as she shifted. Dad turned slowly toward Janet. I asked. What blue brochure? Mom's face emptied. For the first time all morning, she did not answer immediately. I kept my voice level. You just called it blue. It probably was. How would you know? June must have mentioned it. When? I don't know. 10 years ago. To you? Maybe. Where? For God's sake, Hannah. You said you never saw the letter. I didn't. And you never opened mail addressed to me. I said I didn't. Then how did you know the brochure inside that envelope was blue? Mom pushed away from the table. You are unbelievable. Brooke spoke before I could. Mom, how did you know? Janet looked at her. Stay out of this. Brooke went pale. I felt the old instinct to protect her. Not this time. She had asked a question. She could stand beside it. Janet turned back to me. You must have told me. I never received it. You could have known about the program separately. I knew a fellowship existed. I did not know Grandma sent me an application brochure. You're splitting hairs. No. I touched the photocopy. I didn't know there was an enclosure until this week. Mom looked at Dad. He didn't speak. That seemed to anger her more. June talked about Washington constantly, she said. She was always filling your head with nonsense about leaving. So, you did know about the brochure? I knew she wanted you to apply. That isn't the same question. Janet's hands curled around the back of her chair. I was trying to keep you from making a selfish mistake. Nobody moved. I did not need to ask what she meant. She kept going because silence had always made her fill space. You think you were ready to run off to Washington while Brooke was barely functioning? Your father was never home. I had June in my ear, telling you that you should go build some exciting life somewhere else, while everything here was falling apart. I swallowed. Everything here. Yes. Meaning what? Your sister needed support. I needed help. Your father was traveling. You had responsibilities. The same word from Dad's email. Responsibilities. Not dreams? Not opportunities. Not choices. Responsibilities. Mom's voice sharpened. Someone had to think about the whole family. I looked at her. So you decided for me. I protected this family. No. My hands were cold, but my voice wasn't. You protected the version of it that required me to stay useful. Mom stared at me. Dad said quietly, Janet made mistakes. I turned toward him. You asked Grandma to stop encouraging me to leave. I've admitted that. Then stop putting yourself outside the sentence. He frowned. What does that mean? It means she made her choices, and you made yours. Hannah, we needed you. You needed the work I did. That's not fair. For once, the phrase didn't make me move. Mom's voice broke through. After everything we have done for you, you are going to tear this family apart over old letters? There it was. The sentence I had expected before I ever drove over. My body remembered it better than my mind did. The urge to explain rose through me. I'm not tearing anything apart. I still love you. I'm not trying to punish anyone. I almost gave her the whole speech. Then I realized explaining was another job. I opened my folder one last time and took out a single page. I'm not tearing anything apart. I slid one copy to each of them. Janet looked down. What is this? A list of what I'm no longer doing. Her eyes moved over the page. I had kept it plain. No legal language. No threats. Just the responsibilities I was returning to the adults they belonged to. Dad read silently. Brooke's eyes widened. Mom looked up first. You're serious? Yes. You're not going to help your father with his paperwork? He can ask me a specific question if he needs advice. I'm not managing it. What about holidays? I'm not automatically organizing them. Family records? Everyone gets copies of what belongs to them. You've kept those files for years. I know. Brooke's things? I looked at her. Brooke answered before I could. I can handle my own things. Janet ignored her. You are punishing us. No. What would you call this? I folded my hands on the table. Resigning from a job nobody ever asked whether I wanted. Mom stood completely still. For one brief second, she looked genuinely stunned. Then anger returned. So this is because of that man at the wedding. I almost laughed. Owen has nothing to do with this. Of course he does. Some billionaire pays attention to you for 5 minutes and suddenly you're too important for your own parents. There it is, Brooke said. Janet turned. What? Brooke looked at me, then at her. You're doing it again. Doing what? Changing what happened. Mom's face hardened. I stood. The meeting was over. Not because Janet understood. Because I did. By the time I reached my apartment, 3 relatives had texted. One message said Elaine had poisoned me against my mother. Another asked why I was humiliating Janet over things an elderly woman wrote when she was confused. The third was from a cousin I had not spoken to in months. Your mom says Owen Cross is encouraging you to cut everyone off. Please be careful. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the screen. Owen did not even know there had been a meeting. That fact almost made the message funny. Almost. My first impulse was familiar. Write everything. Explain each date. Correct each exaggeration. Make everyone understand before Janet's version hardened. I opened a blank message. Typed 4 paragraphs. Deleted all 4. If I answered every person individually, Janet would still control the structure. She would make a claim. I would chase it. She would make another. I would chase that too. I opened my laptop instead. 1 page. That was the rule. A factual chronology, not a manifesto. I listed what could be supported and nothing more. June continued attempting contact after I had been told she wanted distance. I had contemporaneous records showing I believed June had blocked me, while June's notes showed she had been told the opposite. Brooke remembered giving Janet a sealed envelope addressed to me. Richard had confirmed sending his email asking June to stop encouraging me to leave. Janet had denied seeing the fellowship letter, then described the enclosed brochure as blue. At the bottom, I added one sentence that mattered more than any accusation. I do not know what happened to every missing original letter, and I am not claiming that I do. Brooke called while I was attaching the relevant copies. Do you want me to write something? Only if it's yours. What do you mean? Don't defend me. Don't explain, Mom. Just say what you personally remember. She was quiet. Okay, and only send it if you want to. I do. For the first time in years, I was not assigning Brooke a role. Not witness for me. Not daughter against mom. Just an adult responsible for her own words. My email chimed. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the sender. The recruiter from Washington. I opened it. The first sentence took several seconds to register. We are pleased to offer you the position of Director of Information Governance. I read the rest slowly. Salary. Start date. Relocation support. Reporting structure. A week to decide. A week. The old instinct arrived immediately. Call Dad. Talk to Mom. Ask Brooke what she thinks. Calculate Thanksgiving. Christmas. Emergency distance. Who would help with Dad's insurance? Who would check on Mom if she had another one of those migraines she turned into a household event? Then another thought came. Quieter. Do you want the job? I went back to the job description. The team. The work. The authority to build a records program instead of merely repairing one. Washington. A city I had almost chosen once, before other people decided the choice would inconvenience them. My hands stopped moving. I did not need a week, not because I was angry. Because I had already answered the real question during the interview. I clicked accept. The confirmation appeared on the screen. For a few seconds, I just sat there. Nothing in Boston changed. My parents did not vanish. Brooke did not become less my sister. June did not come back. The past stayed exactly where it was. But my future had moved. I opened the correction email again. The recipients were limited to the people who had already contacted me with Janet's version or who appeared in the old message where she had told relatives not to carry messages between June and me. No social media. No company contacts. No wedding guests. No public humiliation. Only the places where the false record already existed. Brooke's short statement arrived. She had written 5 sentences. No excuse. No accusations. Just what she remembered. I attached it. Then I read the email one last time. Verified. Supported. Unknown where unknown belonged. My finger hovered over send. For most of my life, I had believed telling the truth meant persuading everybody to agree with me. It didn't. Sometimes it meant putting the correct record where the false one had been, and letting other adults decide what kind of people they wanted to be after reading it. I clicked send. The responses began within an hour. Some were defensive. One aunt wrote that private matters should stay private. A cousin apologized for repeating what Janet had told her. Another relative asked if I was sure June had not simply changed her mind back and forth. I answered only factual questions. No arguments. No appeals. Then a reply arrived from Uncle Martin, a man I had barely spoken to since June's funeral. I opened it expecting another lecture. Instead, there was one sentence. Janet told us you asked the whole family not to contact you after June died. Was that not true either? I read it once, then again. Something deep inside me went still. For years, I had wondered why people stopped calling. Why invitations became less frequent. Why cousins who used to send birthday messages gradually disappeared. I had assumed distance spread naturally, that maybe everyone had simply grown tired of me. Now another possibility sat on my screen. The lie had not only kept June away from me, it had taught the rest of them to stay away too. Uncle Martin's message stayed open on my laptop until the words stopped looking like a sentence and started looking like evidence. Janet told us you asked the whole family not to contact you after June died. Was that not true either? I had never asked anyone to stay away. Not after Grandma died. Not before. I searched my old email, then my messages, then the notes I had kept around the funeral because, of course, I had been the one tracking who brought food, who needed hotel information, and which relatives required copies of the service details. Nothing. No message from me asking for distance. No request that anyone stop calling. What I found instead were smaller absences I had never thought to question. A cousin who used to text every birthday, and then stopped. An aunt who sent Christmas cards for years, until one year, there was nothing. A family barbecue I learned about through Brooke's pictures after it happened. At the time, I had filled those gaps with the explanation I knew best. People get busy. Maybe I had been too difficult. Maybe I had made everyone uncomfortable after Grandma died. Maybe there was something about me that made people eventually decide distance was easier. Now, I typed back to Martin. No. I never asked the family not to contact me. If Janet told you that, she did not say it on my behalf with my permission. I did not attach another packet. I did not demand an apology. I sent the sentence and closed the laptop. By Monday morning, responses had separated into 3 kinds. Some people apologized. My cousin Rachel wrote, "I should have called you directly. I believed Janet because she sounded so certain." Aunt Melissa sent something less comfortable. "What your mother did was wrong, but I don't understand why all of us needed to be dragged into it." And then there were people who refused to address what had happened at all. Families are complicated. June could be difficult too. Your mother was under tremendous pressure. I read each message once. A month earlier, I would have answered everyone. I would have explained the chronology again, defended Elaine, clarified Brooke's role, made sure nobody thought I hated Dad, and added 3 paragraphs about how I understood that Mom had probably believed she was doing the right thing. Instead, I created a folder called Responses and moved the messages into it. That was all. The record existed. I was done auditioning for belief. The first person who seemed unable to accept that was Janet. Her email arrived Tuesday morning. The subject line said simply, "I'm sorry." I stared at those words longer than I should have. For years, I had imagined what an apology from my mother might feel like. Warm. Relieving. Something that would travel backward through time and tell the younger version of me that all those years of trying had not been foolish. I opened it. "Hannah, I'm sorry you feel I made mistakes. Everything I ever did was because I loved this family and wanted to keep everyone together. I was under enormous pressure in those years, and your grandmother did not understand how much responsibility I carried. Maybe I made choices you would not make today, but I hope someday you will understand that a mother sometimes has to protect her children from decisions they are not ready to make." I stopped reading, then forced myself to finish. There were 6 more paragraphs. She mentioned Brooke's struggles, Dad's travel schedule, June's tendency to interfere. She mentioned how painful it had been for her to watch me become suspicious. She mentioned Owen by name, implying that the attention I received at the wedding had changed my attitude. She did not mention taking the cream envelope from Brooke. She did not mention telling June I wanted no contact. She did not mention telling me June wanted no contact. She did not mention knowing the brochure was blue. Most importantly, she did not name a single action she had taken. The apology was built almost entirely from things other people had done, felt, misunderstood, or failed to appreciate. Old Hannah would have grabbed the word sorry and carried it like water through a desert. I closed the email, went to work, finished a meeting, reviewed a retention schedule, ate lunch. Only then did I answer. If we are ever going to have a relationship again, I need accountability to be specific. That means acknowledging the actions you took, correcting false information with the people you gave it to, and stopping the use of Dad, Brooke, or other relatives to communicate with me on your behalf. I am not available for further discussion until those things happen. I read it once. Sent it. Her reply came less than 10 minutes later. I already apologized. What more do you want from me? My hands rested on the keyboard. There were so many answers. My 20s back. Grandma back. The application I never made. A version of my father, who had protected my right to choose instead of the convenience of my staying. A mother who asked me what I wanted before deciding what information I could handle. None of those things were available. So I did not answer. That was the first day of no contact. It did not feel victorious. It felt quiet, and harder than I expected. The following evening, Dad asked if he could come over. I almost said no. Then I realized I did want one conversation with him that did not pass through Janet. 30 minutes, I told him. He arrived carrying no folder, which was unusual enough that I noticed. He stood inside my apartment and glanced at the boxes stacked near the wall. You're really going? Yes. Washington. Yes. When were you planning to tell us? I just did. His mouth tightened. I offered him water. He declined. Neither of us sat for a few seconds. Finally, Dad lowered himself into the chair by the window. Your mother is devastated. The sentence was so familiar I could have mouthed it with him. I stayed standing. Why are you telling me? He frowned. What? Why are you telling me how Mom feels? Because you're her daughter. And? She's barely sleeping. That sounds difficult. His expression changed. I had not given him the next step. Normally, he would describe Janet's distress, and I would understand the assignment. Call her. Calm her down. Apologize enough to restore normal operations. This time, the request remained in his hands. Hannah, I don't recognize you right now. I think that's part of the problem. He leaned back. You're being very cold. I'm being clear. You sent documents around to the family. To people Mom had already given false information about me. You embarrassed her. She told people I wanted no contact when I didn't. She was trying to keep things from escalating. I walked to the counter and picked up the copy of his old email. Not because I needed it. Because I was done, allowing the conversation to float away from specifics. Dad saw it and said, We've been over that. You keep saying you were caught in the middle. I was. I set the page in front of him. You weren't in the middle when you pressed send. His jaw worked. I was trying to keep your mother from falling apart. And I was the solution. You were our daughter. I was also an adult with an opportunity. You didn't even know if you would have gotten the fellowship. That isn't the point. Then what is? The choice was mine before anybody knew whether I would get it. He looked away. I sat across from him. For the first time, I let the silence stay uncomfortable. Dad finally said, Maybe I relied on you too much. It was not an apology. But it was more specific than anything Janet had managed. You did. I didn't realize what it looked like from your side. You didn't have to see it from my side. You only had to notice that there was a side other than yours. He rubbed a hand over his face. Your mother handled most of the home stuff. I worked. I traveled. You were good at all the details. It just became normal. For you. Yes. There was something almost relieving about hearing him say it without pretending necessity had fallen from the sky. I nodded toward the page. I'm not managing your paperwork anymore. I know. You'll need to handle the insurance renewal yourself. A faint irritation crossed his face. I hate those calls. I know. He almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because he recognized the sentence. For years, his dislike had been enough reason for the task to become mine. I suppose I'll figure it out, he said. You will. Dad looked around at the boxes again. What happens with us? I don't know yet. You're cutting me off too? No, but I'm not going back to what we had. He nodded slowly. What does that mean? It means if you want to call me, you call me. Don't call because mom wants you to deliver a message. Don't ask me to fix things between the two of you. Don't ask me to explain her behavior. And don't call me only when there's a task you don't want to do. His eyes dropped. That's a lot of rules. They're mostly one rule. What? Have a relationship with me, instead of a service arrangement. He stayed another 10 minutes. When he left, nothing was repaired. That was okay. For once, I was not measuring progress by whether everyone walked away comfortable. Brooke came over 2 days later to help me pack. She arrived with coffee, packing tape, and none of Mom's messages. I noticed that immediately. For the first half hour, we worked almost normally. She wrapped dishes. I labeled boxes. Books, kitchen, office, D.C., closet. Then Brooke picked up a framed picture of us from her college graduation. I was standing beside her in the photograph, holding her purse, her program, and the bouquet someone had handed her while she fixed her cap. Of course I was. Brooke ran her thumb over the glass. I've been thinking about what you said. I closed the box in front of me. Which part? That I benefited from not asking. She placed the photograph carefully on the table. I hated you for saying it. I know. I still kind of hate you for saying it. That's allowed. She gave a weak laugh. Then her face changed. I gave Mom the envelope. I said nothing. I know we already talked about it, but I keep trying to explain it to myself. I was young. Mom was Mom. Grandma had been causing problems. Brooke shook her head. Every version still ends with me giving her something that had your name on it. Yes. I'm sorry. There was no but. I waited. She continued. I also liked that you always fixed things. The admission seemed to cost her more. If I messed something up, you came. If I forgot something, you remembered. Mom made it sound like that was just who you were. It became who I thought I had to be. Brooke looked down. And when she called you difficult, believing her meant I didn't have to ask what it cost you. Something tightened behind my ribs. I could have ended the discomfort for both of us with 3 words. It's all right. Instead, I said, it wasn't okay. Brooke nodded. I know. That was why I still had room for her. Not because she had been innocent. Because she could hear the consequence without demanding I erase it. If Mom wants something from me, I said, don't bring it. I won't. Even if she says it's urgent. I'll tell her to contact you herself. If I'm not speaking to her, that doesn't mean you become the workaround. Brooke took that in. Okay. And don't ask me to make this easier for you. Her eyes met mine. I won't. We went back to packing. Near the end of the afternoon, she held up the old family address book. Is this going? No. What are you doing with it? Giving everyone their own information. Brooke smiled faintly. That sounds very you. For once, it did not sound like a sentence designed to trap me. Some parts of me are worth keeping. After she left, I opened the digital folder I had maintained for more than a decade. Pierce Family Master. The name made me laugh quietly. It contained everything. Scanned warranties, emergency contacts, old appliance receipts, Dad's policy information, Mom's list of medications from the year she had surgery, Brooke's old apartment documents, addresses, birthdays, holiday menus, copies of things people sent me because Hannah won't lose it. The folder was not proof that I had been exploited. Much of it existed because I liked order, because I was good at it, because once, helping people I loved had felt satisfying. The problem was not the skill. The problem was that everyone else had stopped asking. I created individual folders. Richard, Janet, Brooke. I copied documents to each person that reasonably belonged to them and sent simple messages telling them to download and maintain their own copies going forward. I did not delete records they needed. I did not hold anything hostage. Then I opened my reminders. Dad insurance renewal. Delete. Mom tax folder. Delete. Brooke, anniversary gift. Delete. Thanksgiving seating plan. My finger hovered. That one had existed for years. Every November, I arranged who sat where, based on allergies, grudges, hearing problems, divorces, children, and whichever relatives Mom was temporarily refusing to speak to. I had once joked that seating my relatives required more governance than a corporate merger. I clicked delete. My phone buzzed almost immediately. For one irrational second, I wondered if Janet had somehow felt it. Her message appeared. "Who's handling Thanksgiving this year?" I stared at the question. No greeting. No acknowledgement of my email. Just a vacancy in the system. A task looking for its usual owner. I set the phone down. I did not answer. 3 weeks later, the last night before my move, I sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by boxes. Elaine had let me take the June correspondence with the understanding that I would preserve the originals and copies together. I worked slowly. Returned envelopes in protective sleeves. Photocopies in date order. June's mailing notebook. Her handwritten notes. The email printouts. I did not need the box to prove what had happened anymore. I wanted it because those words belonged to a relationship I had been told did not exist. When everything was arranged, I made a new label. June Pierce. Personnel correspondence. Received late. Not unwanted. I pressed the label onto the box and ran my thumb over the edge. For years, the deepest part of the story had been simple. Grandma didn't want me. Then, the letters appeared and reversed it. Grandma did want me. For a while, that felt like salvation. Sitting there in an almost empty apartment, I understood that I had to go one step further. June's love mattered. Her effort mattered. Knowing she had not chosen to abandon me restored something precious. But even if that box had never been found, Janet's choices would not have determined whether I was worth reaching for. I could not spend the second half of my life replacing one judge with another. My value was not a family vote. Not even a loving one. I closed the lid. Washington smelled like rain the morning I moved into my new apartment. It was smaller than the place I had left in Boston, but the living room had 2 tall windows that caught the morning sun. I chose it because I liked the light. That sentence still felt luxurious. Not because it was near anyone. Not because someone might need me. Because I liked the light. The new job started the following Monday. By the end of the first week, I had learned 12 names, inherited a backlog nobody had properly mapped, and discovered that one department used 4 different definitions of official record. I loved it. Not every minute. Not magically. But I liked being in a room where the thing my parents had laughed at was not a strange little talent. It was the reason I had been hired to lead. The title on my office door mattered less than I expected. What mattered was that when someone asked me a question, they waited for my answer. On my first free Saturday, I walked through the neighborhood without a purpose. No pharmacy pickup, no forms to drop off, no emergency grocery run because someone else had forgotten. I bought coffee, sat outside, watched people with dogs pass on the sidewalk. It took nearly 20 minutes before the quiet stopped feeling like I had forgotten something. A few days later, Owen texted, "I'm in D.C. Thursday. Dinner?" I opened my calendar. Thursday evening was empty. So was Saturday. Months earlier, empty space had rarely felt like mine. An empty evening meant somebody could call. A free weekend meant I should visit. An unused vacation day meant I was available when someone else's plan failed. Now an empty square was simply an empty square. I typed back, "Thursday works." He replied with a restaurant suggestion. That was all. No rescue. No grand declaration. No promise that a man with more money than my entire extended family would replace everything I had lost. He was someone I wanted to have dinner with. That was enough. That evening, while I unpacked the last kitchen box, an old calendar notification appeared. Thanksgiving. Seating chart. I had apparently deleted the reminder from one calendar and missed the recurring version on another. I stood at the counter looking at it. Years of tables came back at once. Mom deciding where everyone belonged. Brooke getting the chair beside the people she liked. Dad asking me to move because someone else would be more comfortable. Me carrying plates, fixing problems, changing seats, smoothing conversations, always making the table work. Rarely asking whether I wanted to sit at it. I deleted the reminder. Then I opened the following month. For a moment, I stared at the blank Saturday. I created a new event. Dinner at my place. No guest list yet. Maybe Brooke, if what she was doing continued to match what she had said. Maybe Elaine. Maybe people from work who knew me without 20 years of inherited explanations. maybe Owen. Maybe not. The point was not who came. The point was that nobody had already assigned the seats. For 37 years, I had believed belonging meant being useful enough that people would keep a place for me. I knew better now. My mother had spent half my life deciding which version of me other people were allowed to know. I could not make her admit every lie. I could not make every relative believe me. I could not recover every missing letter or every choice I might have made if I had received them. But I could stop giving her custody of my story. And as I stood in my own kitchen, in a city I had chosen, looking at a table no one else had arranged, I realized I no longer needed to ask where I was supposed to sit. The table was mine. I would decide who belonged there.